So, you probably got sent this video because somebody told you Henry VIII started the Anglican Church. Probably even you were talking to somebody from America or from India or from somewhere in Africa where there's the Anglican Church, right? Not even the Church of England. And somebody said, how can you be Anglican? How can this person be Anglican? How can anyone be Anglican? Isn't the way that the Anglican Church got started because Henry VIII, frankly, he got horny and he wanted a divorce? Isn't that how the entire Anglican Church was created? How could anybody be Anglican if that's the case? And I'm here to tell you that it is not only is it not how Anglicans view Anglicanism, it is not what actually started the Anglican Church or the Anglican tradition of churches. It's not the origin point for the Anglican Communion. It's not the origin point of the church actually in England. It's not the origin point of the church in America. It's not the origin point of any of these churches. Probably, in my opinion, this comes from a variety of things. The people's temptation to talk this way. First, it just does seem in history that the reason for schism, which we'll get into later in this video, was Henry VIII's fault. We'll talk about how that's not really even why the Anglican churches are in schism with, say, the Roman Catholics. But that seems like the important historical point in church history that defines Anglicanism. The next is that the Church of Rome, so the Roman Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, Lutherans, they have this story that they tell about their church, which is really important to the origin of their church, and they're very proud of. So, say with Lutherans, they've got Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and that story to them is really important, and it's something that they take a lot of pride in. Roman Catholics would appeal to Matthew 16:18, and they would say, this is the beginning of our church. Now the difference is that would be the exclusive beginning of their specific denomination. And that, to them, historically, was the origin point for the church as well, because they made exclusive claims about their church being equivalent to the church, which Anglicans don't make. In fact, we've never made the claim to be the entirety of what's called the Catholic Church, and we can get into that term in a second. Unlike the church which calls itself, frankly, the Catholic Church. They make the claim that they are the entire Catholicos comes from the Greek of the whole. They are the whole church. So the story about how their denomination came into being is equivalent to the story for how the church came to be. So, needless to say, all of that I think makes it tempting to say, okay, well, the reason Anglicans are not any of these other denominations is they go back to the Church of England, and there's this really pivotal moment in the Church of England that seems like the foundational story for the denomination. And many people tell that story in conjunction with the idea that that's how the Church of England came to be. But it's a little more complicated than that. I also think, from people who aren't as well-meaning, who aren't making this mistake accidentally, I think part of it comes from the difficulty of older traditions to assail Anglicanism on our doctrines alone. What I mean by this is that since Anglicans maintain historic apostolic succession, which Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy hold very important, and they have a historic liturgy, which they also hold very important, and it's a beautiful liturgy, which has even been adopted by certain rites in Roman Catholicism and in Eastern Orthodoxy, it makes us Catholic, truly Catholic, of the whole, in form, and in the passing on of the traditions from before the Reformation, after the Reformation. There's a continuity that goes back from our bishops all the way to the 12 apostles. And we maintain the primacy of Holy Scripture, so we've got that tradition, but we've also got this Protestant element that makes us less assailable from the Protestant angle. Protestants can't just point and say, oh, you have all these traditions you think are more important than the Bible. Which we clearly don't hold on the same level as the Bible. We make that pretty clear as well. It makes us very difficult, in my opinion, to attack on doctrine. It also comes from the fact that Anglicanism is a broader tradition than, say, other traditions which have more narrow doctrines. All of that being said, it's very difficult to attack Anglicanism on our doctrines. Most of the doctrines we hold strongly are the ones that everyone agrees on. I mean, that's part of why we hold them very strongly, things like the Trinity, things like sola fide, I would argue, and certain articulations of sola fide, we can get into the distinctions, are pretty common to Christian branches. So they're not going to be attacked as intensely as, say, something very particular to, say, Lutheranism, like their specific view of the Eucharist and the real presence. And Anglicanism, another great example, we would say there is a real presence, but we don't explain exactly how the real presence is modally present, so it's hard to attack Anglicanism from that direction. So instead, I think for people who are trying to dissuade you from becoming Anglican, partially because they want you to become whatever they are, they attack the history of the Anglican Church. So let's start tackling the issue. This is going to be a long video, so buckle in. It is true, let's concede this, that Henry VIII initiated and supported a schism between the Church of England and the Pope because the Pope refused to grant him an annulment. Not a divorce, but an annulment. An annulment just basically means that you were technically never married in the first place because there was something wrong about the formulation of the marriage. In Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he claimed because Catherine of Aragon was rightfully married to his brother before they were married, that he was not supposed to have been granted a dispensation by the Pope to marry her because it does break Levitical law. And he believed that the reason he was infertile was because he had broken Levitical law. So he was seeking an annulment and would try to marry somebody else. Especially at this stage, by the way, this isn't actually some kind of, base lust desire for him to marry somebody new. He did have affairs outside of marriage, so he wasn't a perfect person. But also there was the stability of the realm at stake. So he had no problem, by the way, not sleeping with other women that weren't his wife. Many kings of the time didn't have a problem with that. But what he needed was a legitimate heir to take the throne after him. And all he had was one daughter, and he desired a male heir for the stability of his realm. Of course, the Pope did not give him this annulment, in part because the Catherine of Aragon's uncle was currently sitting in Rome with a huge army, and so the Pope didn't really feel like he had latitude to grant this annulment, even if the arguments were sound. And you can look into the arguments for yourself on whether or not he should have been granted the annulment. But really, and this is the thesis of this video, that's actually not particularly relevant to the history or some kind of claim to existence for the Church of England. And the first principle that I want to establish here, and especially for Anglicanism as a concept, is that the Anglican Church literally just means, it comes from the Latin phrase Ecclesia anglicana, which just means English church. You can find that phrase in the Magna Carta, for instance. It just refers to the Church of England. It's a jurisdiction, it's a province. Our fundamental ecclesiological principle is diocesanal and then provincial. So the Church of England clearly existed before the Reformation even, and it goes way back. You can find other videos that go more in depth on the history of the Church of England, but a short summary here is that the churches, parishes, bishops, priests, all this stuff that had existed before the Reformation continued through the Reformation in England. And those institutions and those people and those places and all those things trace their origins back to Christians that were likely Roman soldiers in the 2nd and 3rd century that migrated to Britain. St. Alban is a historic martyr from this group of people. And then the ecclesiology, the institutions of the Church of England, go back ultimately to St. Augustine of Canterbury, who was the first Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the provincial see of the Church of England. Many people don't know this, but there's also technically 2 archbishops in the Church of England. But effectively, if you trace the apostolic succession of all of the bishops in the Anglican Communion, it'll all eventually go back to Augustine of Canterbury, which then goes through Pope Gregory, who sent him to Canterbury to evangelize to the English people after a period of paganization. And then he met people who were already Christian there, so he didn't really even start the Christian communities in that same sense. The Church of Wales goes back further. And long story short, that is the origin story for even the ecclesiastical institution of the Church of England. So in that sense, the Church of England, Anglicanism, goes back in that way, and then through St. Augustine of Canterbury, through Pope Gregory, all the way back to the Apostles. And that is the sense in which we make a claim to being a Catholic church, a part of the whole organism of Catholic churches that was founded by Christ. Secondly, the principle is that autonomy, that we have the right to cause schisms and things like that if we disagree doctrinally, is a historically well-founded tradition in Britain. And I won't go into it too much, but basically there's been insular Christianity, which was distinct from Roman Christianity. The Venerable Bede records gradual assimilation of the Church of England to Roman authority, which was not instantaneous in the Middle Ages. And even then, there were proto-Protestants in England, like John Wycliffe, who exercised their own kind of doctrinal influence on the Church of England, although he was heavily opposed by the Church of England at the time. But he was still influential. The medieval church, effectively, was more complicated than the cut and dry ecclesiology of Roman Catholicism today. So when we say, we claim some kind of heritage towards that medieval Christianity and that prior Christianity, and then you say, well, but weren't they all Roman Catholics? I think Anglicans would take issue with the idea that all of these pre-Council of Trent Christians in England were, or in Great Britain really, were perfectly modern Vatican I and Vatican II Roman Catholics. The third reason, and I think this is the big reason, and I think this is something that I wish people would understand better, is that Henry's schism, so the schism that he initiates so that he can crown himself the head of the governor of the Church of England, I think the head of the Church of England, grant himself a divorce, all that stuff, is not the schism that exists today between the Church of England and Rome. You might be surprised to hear that. Isn't Henry VIII the beginning of the schism? Well, no, his schism was over. And the title that he claimed and the authority he claimed over the church, head of the Church of England, actually ended with him. So, well, it continued slightly with his son Edward. Basically, Henry dies, and he's succeeded by his son Edward. He eventually does have a son after many divorces and a long tyrannical reign, who is supported in his court and his uncles, and it's a long, complicated story, by Reformed Protestants, who he reinvites all of these more Calvinistic, we could say that Calvinism isn't quite a thing in the same way that it is today then, but Reformed Protestants come into the Church of England, and they have a strong influence on the doctrines of the Church of England at that time. Okay, but then Edward dies without an heir, and his will isn't followed, so his half-sister Mary, if you remember from earlier, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who the Pope had defended her parents' marriage, is very partial to Roman Catholicism. She marries the King of Spain, Philip II, I believe his name is, and returns England to the Roman communion. Everybody's Roman again, is the attempt. Of course, there's lots of resistance from Protestants, and Mary, in order to try to bring by force the entire country of England back into submission to Rome, ends up earning the moniker Bloody Mary, and makes lots of martyrs, including many of the important influences like Thomas Cranmer, Nicholas Ridley, and Hugh Latimer, who were influential in the liturgical tradition that Anglicans use today in the Book of Common Prayer. She martyrs them in order to try to bring back and officiate the communion with Rome, to try to instantiate, I should say, the communion with Rome, as of course there was. So, there you go. That's it. That was the end of Henry's schism with Rome. So, any element of the Henry story being the explanation for, say, our unique communion existing, I think just vanished there. It vanishes within a generation of Henry VIII's reign. Now you might say, wait, but are Anglicans still in communion with Rome? Well, we're not. But to answer that question, we have to keep talking about the history of the Church of England. When Mary eventually dies without an heir, her half-sister, Elizabeth I, is brought to the throne as the successor. Now the question is, okay, Edward was Reformed, Mary was Roman Catholic and obedient to the Pope. What is Elizabeth going to do? And she really wasn't partisan prior to her reign. People were very confused. Some historians have tried to reconstruct her religious beliefs, even though she was very private about them. And it seems like potentially something like a high church Lutheranism. She was still a defender of religious images, so she wasn't an iconoclast, although she did seem sympathetic to Protestants. she really was not a totalitarian. Unlike Henry VIII and unlike her sister Mary, she didn't really want to impose onto England a new religion of some kind, or a new system, or a new whatever, against the will of the English people. She was not a totalitarian. And the chaos that had preceded her, I think, kind of left an impression that it really wasn't even effective to try to force a new kind of way of being onto the country. And she simply wanted to heal the divided country. And so following convocations and trying to understand where the bishops of the Church of England and the laity and the clergy were at, it was when Elizabeth and Parliament and all of the Church of England then decided to break again communion with Rome and go into a more moderate Protestantism. There was an attempt to say, all right, well, here's the best arguments from, say, the traditionalists who don't want to change that much, and here's the best arguments from, say, the reformers who are pointing out where some things have been accreted, some things have changed in the past couple hundred years in the Roman practice. Again, this is a long, complicated history. If you want to look into all the different debates, all the different controversies from the time, you are free to do so. This is just a summary of how it works. And all this to say that the summary documents like the 39 Articles, which define the area of acceptable theology in Anglican history, the Book of Common Prayer, all of these things were solidified largely during the reign of Elizabeth. A lot of our important formularies, like St. Richard Hooker, lived during her reign. John Jewel comes back to England. A lot of these key figures in Anglican theology are actually Elizabethan rather than any of the preceding figures. So in reality, you have to look at, okay, well, why was Protestantism popular? Who were the important preachers? Who were the important figures? And then it gets into the exact same history that's going on around the rest of Europe, where certain theologians make serious arguments for their theological claims from history and from the Bible and from tradition and yada, yada, yada. And princes, secular princes is the term, or magistrates, whatever you want to call them, kings, throw their weight into these debates as well. And that is not unique to English history either. It might not have been ideal, but it was certainly the way that it worked in, say, Austria with the Habsburgs coming in favor of the Counter-Reformation for Roman Catholicism. William of Orange in the Netherlands supporting Calvinism. The Saxon prince supporting Lutheranism. This is happening all over. This is just a natural consequence of the political structure at the time, because religion was more of a public affair than it is today. The argument that is trying to be made against Anglicanism is, look, Anglicans changed all this stuff at the Reformation. They're not contiguous with the medieval church. I would ask the question back to those who support the Roman Catholic Church, at least. How much has the Roman Catholic Church changed since Vatican II? I would argue that in light of certain councils in the Roman Catholic Church, more substantive changes to the official teaching of the Church have happened than any of the changes that happened during the English Reformation. In the same way that somebody could say, oh, well, the cause of all of this differences in the distinct Anglican theology has its vague roots in the political actions of Henry VIII, although they would have just as much of their origins in Henry VII and all the other English stuff, because it's a living, breathing country where the church has had a living, breathing relationship with politics. I would say the same thing could be said about any of the popes who were in charge of certain important Vatican councils, which have been extremely influential in church doctrine. I would say the Council of Trent. Even a normal, practical Roman Catholic historian could acknowledge that the Council of Trent changed a lot about the function and the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. An author that I really like, Peter Martyr Vermigli, who had a lot of influence on Anglican theology, wrote a book called The Loci Communes, or Common Places, where he's arguing with theologians he disagrees with about certain doctrines. One of the theologians he's disagreeing with, who was a teacher, a professor of theology in a Roman Catholic church, was a man named Pygius, I think Albert Pygius. Albert Pygius denied original sin, which today Roman Catholicism dogmatically teaches and has taught since the Council of Trent. So the Council of Trent did clean up a lot of things people were teaching, but prior to it there was a lot of ambiguity. We would basically say the same thing is true about the English Reformation. Every denomination, and I have a longer discussion actually about this concept, but every denomination has to, at the end of the day, acknowledge this concept called the development of doctrine. The fundamental claim of any Christian faith that wants to seriously be a combatant for the closest approximation to true theology has to argue that the faith the apostles received from Jesus Christ, that he taught to them, that they were promulgating in the Bible and in the early church, that faith has been contiguous and taught seriously since the apostles were on earth, and the faith that they taught is not different than what we teach. That is the only serious claim that any Christian theologian should be making, because the Bible teaches that the faith can't change. Paul in Galatians says that if someone teaches them a new gospel, let him be anathema. Jude, in his letter, references the faith once delivered for all time to the apostles. Christianity is a belief, is a religion which has a point where all of our doctrines were delivered to us. Okay. However, we would also acknowledge development of doctrine in the sense that we more clearly articulate our doctrine as time goes on. So a controversy will emerge in the church, say like the First Council of Nicaea, where certain people, like Arius, who was an archbishop, I believe, or a bishop of some kind, starts teaching a doctrine a lot of people say is heretical. And then he has opponents, and the people who support Arius say that the opponents are heretical, like St. Nicholas, for example. Okay, who, yes, is the St. Nicholas of Santa Claus, who teach the traditional Orthodox understanding of Christ's divinity. The controversy erupts in this period of church history. The church assembles to discuss what the Orthodox doctrine is. They get as many theologians as they can, they get as many bishops as they can, and they get as many people to bind onto their jurisdictions what they believe to be the Orthodox teaching. And because we believe that Christ made promises to his church, and we believe that the Holy Spirit guides the church, as those councils become more authoritative, the language adopted in that council becomes more commonplace, and we get more and more comfortable using those words to describe what we argue is the belief that existed before those councils. So we wouldn't say that Nicaea started the belief in the divinity of Christ. We would just say that it now clearly taught it and used specific terms so that we know, okay, that person's using the wrong terminology and that person's using the right terminology. The way I would articulate this is that the further back in church history we go, the purer doctrine gets, the more close it is to the apostles' teaching, but the less clear that it is. People haven't developed a lot of distinct language. The word Trinity is a development of doctrine that teaches what the Bible teaches about how the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and the Father are all God, but God is still one. And so how do we articulate that? Well, the Trinity is the word we use for that. Okay. Of those kinds of developments of doctrine, the Anglican claim is that the Reformation in England was one of those development points. And there was lots of differences in the very tumultuous time. There were lots of different articulations and different factions. There were the Puritans who wanted the church to be this way, and there were the High Churchmen who wanted it to be that way. And as time went on, the Anglican tradition has actually solidified, the Puritans are not in the Church of England. The Puritans eventually end up becoming separatists. They leave because the church doesn't adopt what they believe. You get the 1662 convocations, and more clarity starts to come, more terminology, different ideas. You get different theologians who articulate Anglican doctrine more precisely. Rather than just having 39 articles, you've got this book behind me, the Anglican Dogmatics book, which goes really in depth on what Anglicans believe about different things. And we would say fundamentally the English Reformation was one of those moments where doctrine, as guided by the Holy Spirit, was developing. And we would just make the claim that where there was ambiguity in the pre-Christian church, in the pre-Reformation church, we've clarified. And, the Roman Catholics are on this side arguing this way, and we're on this side arguing that way. And the only way to repair those relationships would be to have ecumenical conversations now, rather than trying to dismiss the entire Anglican tradition, the Anglican tradition in America, the Anglican tradition in Africa, the Anglican tradition in India, the Anglican tradition in China, in Japan, in England, of course, in Europe, by simply dismissing it as the consequence of horny Henry. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, you can like the video. If you want to subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell button. You'll be notified every time I upload a new video.